Handshakes and hashes, pulling passwords out of thin air. This is something that Robert and I had talked about for almost a year and a half now.
Yeah, probably going on almost 2, I think, yeah.
And most of this, I have to admit, came from Robert and me trying to understand what the hell he was talking about. So he had spent a lot of time in password space, and I just wanted to understand it. And so we kind of put this talk together because I thought it was super interesting, and he wanted to share it, and I like to talk, so here I am. Robert over here on the left for you. Any contact info, find us on Twitter and that sort of stuff, and me over here on the right. My beard's not quite that long anymore, but I'm working on it. What we were really trying to do with this, beyond just kind of me understanding what he was talking about, is expose some of the vulnerabilities with passwords and the weaknesses there. I think it's pretty well understood that passwords are just a bad thing, but it's not necessarily, in my opinion, that the password system is bad. It's the choices that humans make that make it bad. And we wanted to kind of demonstrate that, if you use the right passwords, password systems, if they're implemented correctly, can be really strong. But by doing this talk, we wanted to kind of give some encouragement to have people make better choices about the passwords that they choose. But we're not using these passwords that we're finding. We're just demonstrating that we can get them. So we're not the bad guys, promise.
No kidding, right?
So the way that we're doing it is ultimately by cracking hashes. And I wanted to understand what that process was of cracking hashes, because I guess I always thought before I started talking to Robert that cracking hashes meant you took the hash and you worked backwards. And it turns out that is not right. So I wanted to kind of talk about that. And the second point is how we're actually getting more, because we need to do things for science. We're actually collecting more hashes to do some of these tests with. And that was a lot of what he's been working on. All right. So password cracking. I know this is going to be hard to read, but when you submit a password to a system for creating a new account or authenticating, what should be happening is the process of that password generates a hash, right? It runs through an algorithm, and then it generates a string that represents what you entered, and then should be storing that hash, but not the actual password itself. I mean, it's not always the case because, we've seen plain text password leaks and that sort of stuff. But the idea is that if you think of it in a way like algebra, you input the same variables to a formula, you get the same output. Now that's, of course, why salt is super important, because if two users enter the same password and your hash algorithm is consistent, two users get the same hash, and that's not good for being able to identify the uniqueness of passwords in your systems. Not all places use hashes, but the end result is that if you enter the same values into this algorithm, you get the same output. And ultimately, that means that unlike algebra, we can't unwind it, right? Because we can't work backwards from the hash. We have to actually just input the same values. But what we're doing is by inputting the same password, potentially salt or other information to run the algorithm, we can generate the same hash and compare what we found in a leak or some other mechanisms and compare the two. And if we get the same value, that means we guessed the same password that you actually used. Does that make sense? Like, that took me a year to figure out. But that was through a lot of conversation with Robert to figure that out. So the next question I had was, okay, how fast can you do this? How quickly can you run through these guesses to generate and compare hashes? And it totally depends on the algorithm used for generating the hashes, right? If you use a simple algorithm, you can do it really quickly. If you use a complicated one, it takes longer. And the process is generally measured in 1 million hashes per second, which to me was already surprising. That 1 million a second just sounds like a lot. So I wanted to get an idea of how long does that take? Well, if we just do an alphanumeric password, a password that has just numbers and letters, uppercase, lowercase, 0 through 9, you figure out how many combinations are available in there by taking the number of characters to the power of the length of that password. So we're only doing one set here. Just a simple 8-character password is 62 to the power of 8, which is 218 trillion combinations. That sounds like a lot, right? And that's not even using special characters. So 218 trillion combinations just in an 8-character alphanumeric password. So, all right, if we got that, how long is it going to take to crack it? So we took a couple pieces of hardware to just run through the scenarios to see how long it would take. Just looking at an Intel regular CPU, an NVIDIA GPU, and then Hashtopolis. Does everybody know what Hashtopolis is?
So for anyone that's not aware of what Hashtopolis is it's kind of a way that you can distribute work across multiple machines and have those multiple machines concurrently work on a single task. And that's a huge hurdle in the password world, is trying to get clusters of computers working towards a single task in order to complete that task quicker. And Hastopolis is a really nice program that kind of does that. And I've had a pretty good hand in the development of that. But ultimately, Sane, an individual that is in the Cynosure Prime group, is the one we have to thank for really developing that and fleshing it out into what it is today. So if that seems like something you need in your life, that is something you should definitely be checking out.
Yeah, and it's derived kind of like Octopus, right? The idea that a job is broken up and distributed through a bunch of machines, and they all report back on the results, so you can have distributed cracking going on. So, starting with what you consider to be a simple algorithm, MD5, which is generally used for checking the signatures of a file, so you can kind of compare, are these two files the same? There's some collision issues with it, but it's a quick algorithm to compare files pretty easily. And with an Intel CPU, you can do 214 million hashes a second. Like, that's pretty substantial, right? I mean, 224 million is a lot, but when you throw a GPU on it, you get 13,000 million. Like, it's substantially faster. So using a single GPU just cuts that time down to a feasible amount of time. But if you put them in a farm and start distributing it, in this example, we had 15 different GPUs I was running through, and we could do 358 million, or billion. Ooh, billion. I still don't know the numbers. I'm bad at this. But 358 billion hashes a second across a farm like that. So looking at the time, the Intel CPU is at 11 days to crack all of them in MD5, and Hastopolis can do it in 10 minutes. On just 15. But you can grow that, right? You add as many nodes as you want, and you can just kind of make that even quicker. So in our case, we're not trying to crack MD5, because hopefully you're not using MD5 for hashing passwords. We're actually looking at WPA2. And WPA2 is what's used to secure authentication on most Wi-Fi networks. And on an Intel CPU, you're getting only 17,000 hashes a second. Am I saying that one right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Well,
and
K-hash. So
17,000 hashes. And then when we're looking at the NVIDIA GPU, we're still getting 50,000, but we get 5.7 million with the farm. So in time frames, we go from 380 years for an Intel CPU to about a year in a farm. Now, that's still a fair amount of time. And again, we're not talking about passwords of variable length or special characters. So the real numbers that we're looking at when we're doing these is actually substantially bigger. But just to get an idea of a special character set, this is kind of the context that we're working in. So if you knew the password was alphanumeric and 8 characters long, and you were willing to run through every variety of characters in that set, it could take you a year to go through it all. Totally feasible if you're willing to wait, but we want to do better than that. So if you have a whole bunch of GPUs, this is kind of what it looks like. Just
a few
sitting in your basement. So you can add more to make that go faster. But the idea of doing brute force is one method of picking candidates to enter into the algorithm, right? You just roll a character, and that's where you get that year time frame or longer if you're looking at different character sets, which sucks. You don't want to do that. So instead, one of the other options you have is just use examples of credentials that have already been leaked out there, right? You know that these passwords have been used in the past. Humans are creatures of habit. Try using those first. And if you hit those numbers, then you don't have to bother waiting a year because you just guessed somebody else. So that's one mechanism you can use. And RockU is a popular one that most people have heard of. There's a password list that we'll use it as an example later. But another thing that we can do is actually emulate the behaviors of humans, right? We can say, well, here's a password that somebody's used. It's called password. And some people like to do what they think is leet speak, right? They replace A's with ats and numbers with letters and letters with numbers. And sometimes they'll add a bang at the end. So using a known patterns of behavior that humans use for picking passwords, we can choose candidates to try first because they're more likely to actually have been used. And then
so as far as leaks go, when you have a look at public leaks sitting out there that are kind of a group of individuals have really started to attack these and collectively put all of their founds into one sort of centralized place. The big thing that we'll see is that it's very rare that you'll ever have a 100% completion rate. And that remaining chunk of leaks is where the really interesting stuff happens. So this is where most of your password cracking individuals are really looking for ways to crack those hashes that have not been found. And that's like our, holy grail of information. That's what we need to really do, because we don't have methods to easily reproduce or figure out what hashes or what passwords are actually in there without finding them first. So when we have a look at all of the founds that were previously found in these, right? We can kind of analyze and find patterns and figure out what exactly it is that the individuals in these same kind of societies, because each public leak that ends up coming out has their own group or demographic in them. So a lot of people tend to think alike when they're working in groups, and they have a centralized goal or things of that nature, where you can kind of utilize those same exact patterns that they do and kind of come up with better password guesses for the remainder of your hash lists.
Do you remember about how many passwords are represented in this here? I mean, each leak is different sizes, but
yeah, each leak is different sizes. However, I mean, it ranges from anywhere of a couple thousand to quite a few million. But the big thing here is that some of these are really, really old, and some of these are kind of new. So it doesn't really matter, like time-wise, things have not really changed as far as how users are entering their passwords, and that's one of the big things that we really need to bring to light, is that even though we have all of these suggestions, and even though the password community has, worked hard at trying to bring up guidelines of what you should be doing as far as creating passwords, it hasn't really worked all that well. In some instances, maybe it has, but overall, that really hasn't seemed to have much of an impact. So we're trying to kind of do the research of what is exactly do we need to do in order to kind of fix this problem, because it's a major problem. So we're kind of working towards bringing to light, hey, this is a major issue, and at the same time working towards finding other patterns that, hey, we can crack these now too. And so it's kind of this constant battle of trying to educate and at the same time trying to break.
So one of the things I followed up very quickly is, why can't you just look it up in a rainbow table? Like, those are the way things work. And very graciously, he said, no, you're dumb. Rainbow tables are not awesome. One of the problems with rainbow tables is that they're generally pre-calculated hashes from a specific algorithm. And if an algorithm is being used with things like salts, they're useless. Because you don't know what that hash was generated with, and it doesn't help to look up the hash. If you're not familiar, the idea of a rainbow table is supposed to be that you have a list of a hash and the matching password that generated it. But the algorithm has some other variables that you might not have access to or be able to reproduce. So rainbow tables, no. You really want to use the actual plain text password so that you can feed it through the algorithm and generate the hash to compare to whatever system you're trying to compare the hashes with. And Cynosure Prime, go ahead.
Yeah, so Cynosure Prime is kind of a password research collective. We tend to kind of look at public leaks and crack as much as we can, and then come up with statistics and kind of details of what we think was done right, or weird or interesting things that may or may not have been done correct. Those kinds of things. We do have a blog that we kind of post interesting things to. And it's just kind of a group of hobbyist crackers that like to do password things, and we just kind of hang out and do the stuff that we want to do and what we find is fun. So and some cool things come of that, and this is one of them. So CHASM, Cynosure Prime is releasing this today. In fact, it just went up live on GitHub a couple hours ago, so you can definitely get the open source for CHASM. But we're basically reusing existing patterns just like a normal human would do. We tend to have these things, these tricks that we always do, and what we need to do is kind of recreate that on a machine level. So this particular method basically splits known passwords, and then we rejoin them on whatever password or character we split them on. So for example, if we have password and we're splitting them directly in the middle, you'd come up with pass on the left and word on the right, and then we would store that information in a file name and basically say, when we put these back together, we want to combine all the left-hand side of them and all of the right-hand side of them based on what character we split on. So we take go back.
This one.
Yeah. So if you take a list of quite a few thousand known passwords, and the source of this list is pretty important for efficiency-wise, accuracy of what you're going to be generating. Usually what we would do is we would crack a bunch of a hash list, a specific hash list, take whatever we have found, put it through CHASM, and as you split on each character, you would then recombine the matching characters into creating a ton of different password candidates for them that have a highly likely, how do I want to say that?
Match.
Yeah, so like they're really good candidates for a good password.
Yeah, the example that's in here just shows how if you take some of the words that are split on the same letter and rejoin them, you oftentimes find a similar character following that same one. So if you have words that split on E, it'll have sometimes the same pattern follows E, right? So like in password, when you're splitting on S, password and other variants of password show the same thing.
So yeah, we're kind of playing off this language, standard, right? Like as you're language in general always kind of has this pattern, especially with like consonants and vowels, following each other. And if we can exploit that and match other things that generally speaking should follow other things, we come up with really good password candidates that become really, really effective in the password cracking world.
Yeah, so one of the reasons that I found this to be useful is when you start looking at the number of candidates that this generates for you that are using patterns that are more statistically probable to match than just rolling characters, right? So if we look at, winter and summer and big baller, they all split on E. And if you rejoin them, now you not only get winter and summer of 2017 either, but you get winter forever, you get big ball of 2017, right? And that can be not only matched and split back on the same character, but these are just text files. So you can literally join them in opposite ways. You can just say, take the left side, everything on left, and join it with everything on right. And then you can also say, actually, I want to actually join everything from the right with everything on the left. It doesn't matter. They're just text. So you can flip and join everything around. And what happens if you took RockU, which has 14.3 million unique passwords in it, and you split it just right down the middle without any kind of logic or anything, and rejoin left and right, you get not only that 14 million candidates, but you get 16.2 trillion options. And then if you rejoin them from right to left as well, you end up with 32.5 trillion new candidates just splitting down the middle. Now we had, 218 trillion of just rolling all of the characters together, but these patterns represent things that humans have used before.
Yep.
So that actually helps to put the probable candidates at the top of your test as opposed to just rolling through all of A with one B and then do it again, right? So like Robert said, you can get CHASM today. It's on the GitHub site. That was one side of the thing we wanted to talk about. Is there any questions about the password cracking, CHASM, or anything like that? Before we move on to
probably one of the biggest takeaways from CHASM is that we are utilizing, we're splitting a password, we're storing what character we split on, and then we are recombining all of the left side of what we split on with the right side of what we split on based on what character we split on in the first place. So,
and it doesn't have to be right in the middle. You can say split on the third character, split on whatever it is you like. So you can actually take your existing word list and reparse them in any sort of way that you want. So there's many options in there. So that's the password cracking side of it. But aside from just cracking known password lists, we want more password samples that we can test these algorithms against. So how do we do that? Well, it turns out Wi-Fi clients, they're super happy to just give them to you. So you don't have to hack or break or anything. You just kind of have to listen. Tune in your wireless adapter and they'll just give it to you because they're super friendly. So the way that it works, I had to kind of walk through this with Robert as well to figure out why does that do that? Well, if you look at the way wireless works, the first thing that happens at kind of like that layer 1 in OSI is the clients and the access points have to find each other. So there's a little bit of discovery, right? So as an access point, Robert's over there and he's just beaconing out. He's just yelling, "Hey, I'm Robert. I'm Robert. I'm over
How's it
here.
going?
I'm Robert." And then as a client, I'd be over here, and maybe I'm saying, yo, Robert, where are you? You out, bro? Okay. And then he sees what I'm doing, which is really a probe request. And so either of these two things can start it, right? A client can be listening for beacons and respond to the beacon with a probe request, or the client can send out a probe request and then the access point can reply.
Over here, I'm Robert, right?
Yeah, that's me. And then since we've established that part, we can say, all right, now I want to shake your hand, right? So that's kind of the discovery side. There's probes and beacons that are being broadcast to basically anyone who will listen, and we're willing to listen. So basically what happens is, you hear about the channels and frequencies. They actually have the antennas that are tuning each channel, and they're sending out these beacon frames and listening in for any kind of probes. And then it essentially just tells you who they're looking for, right? When a client sends out a probe request, it said, hey, Robert, are you there? And then any of you can say, yeah, I'm Robert, even if you're not, right? So that's basically what we're taking advantage of. And once they get to that point of doing the handshakes, that's when they start doing some attestation to say, like, all right, are you who I was actually looking for? That didn't really exist before, like in WEP, right? It would just connect.
It wasn't,
and that gave us karma, right? The karma attack allowed you to do man in the middle, because you would respond to the probe requests and you would just let them connect, and then they would associate and you'd start stealing their traffic, at least if I'm understanding that correct. And so what happened then is WPA and WPA2 came out to do some encryption so that on the association, they actually would only exchange data once they've done what's called the four-way handshake. So in the four-way handshake, what happens is both the access point and the client have a pre-shared key, and the pre-shared key is run through an algorithm to create a PMK. It's basically the hash of their password that it uses for other algorithms later. But the point is both the AP and the client got this pre-shared key out of band. It's never exchanged over the air. So when the client sends, or the access point has been solicited to connect, it then sends what's called an anonce. It's message 1. And the anonce is literally a 256-bit random character that just says, here you go, what do you get when I give you this?
Right. You can basically think of it like a question, right? Like a secret question. Like, I want, a secret response from this specific question. And the client is going to then respond with the answer to that question. And if that actual answer matches what the access point had, the access point is going to go ahead and say, okay, well, here is kind of my secret message to you that you can prove that I actually know the pre-shared key without actually sending the pre-shared key, right?
Yeah, so they get that those messages on both sides, which they run an algorithm behind the scenes to compare, would I have gotten that with the same pre-shared key? So the pre-shared key is the key to how this works. It's validating how each of these access points should associate because they have the same pre-shared key. And then the fourth message is basically just the client saying, great, we're all good, let's go ahead and start talking data now. So in this scenario, knowing how that works, how is that useful? Well, HCX Tools is freaking awesome.
HCX Tools is an amazing group of tools. You can basically attack just about any sort of Wi-Fi authentication method, which we'll kind of get to some of it a little bit later. But I want to highlight a specific attack that HCX Tools does really, really well. And so a particular program module, whatever you want to say, for HCX Tools is WLAN dump. And WLAN dump basically kind of takes advantage of clients looking for access points. So if we think back to kind of the karma attack going on there, where you have a device that's sending out a, hey, are you here? We as attackers, right, can then say, yeah, I'm over here, okay? And generally speaking, when you're talking about karma attack, this is where things fail because authentication kind of takes over and you can't do anything with the client. However, if I say I'm over here, there's no reason why the client would not want to connect to me. So if I send a, basically they're like, hey, I want to shake hands with the access point that said I'm over here, right? So our next step would be the access point, us being the malicious attacker, would then say, here is our first part of the WPA handshake, the question, right? The secret question that you should be getting a response to. So the client goes, okay, yeah, all right, I have the pre-shared key. Let's go ahead and send over the encrypted answer to that question that you sent me. Well, here's where things get kind of interesting, because there's zero authentication going on here, and the client is literally just sending us an encrypted form of the answer, and we actually asked the question ourselves, right? We asked, hey, what do you get with pickles, right? And the client is going to respond with, I get tartar sauce or something, right? Yeah. So that's kind of the heart of our attack here, is that we can just kind of listen out in a karma-like attack and say, if an access point is around, or a client is around and it's looking for an access point, we can go ahead and say, I'm that access point. And literally that client will hand us everything that we need in order to crack that pre-shared key for the network it's looking for.
Yeah, because this is the part that would usually fail, because now as the access point, they've taken that 256-bit random and they've encoded it and sent it back. But since I don't have the real pre-shared key, I can't send a legitimate message 3 to complete the association. Truth is, I don't care. I'm not trying to get you to associate right now. All I want to do is get that handshake hash from you so that I can then take it offline and crack it. So now instead of responding, I just go away, and the client's like, what happened? Where'd the access point go? It turns out that's a normal behavior in Wi-Fi, right? Sometimes stuff goes out of reach, it can't dissociate, and it just keeps looking. But that's the best part, it keeps looking. Wireless devices that have associated with something in the past, they're set to automatically connect to stuff. So all of your phones right now are sitting here looking for your home network, your work network, your hotel network, the Starbucks, whatever else you looked at, and every one of them are sending out probes for all of those connections or networks that it automatically connected to. And this thing right here is super happy to oblige and associate with all of your phones. You're welcome. So, karma is dead, but long live karma. It's basically doing that whole process of just listening for the probe request, standing up the SSID, letting the clients connect, sending a code back to get message to, and then drops them and just keeps going. So without having to be at the actual network, we don't have to deauth users. It will happily deauth users, but it will just happily let users connect to them and get any network they're ever looking for, in addition to networks they're actively connected to as well with the deauthing. Correct. So it can be really aggressive, it could be really friendly, but with WLAN dump, you have a lot of options for how to do this. But then we get the hashes and we can crack them offline. So
this is basically like the original hardware that I was running on. You'd have a Raspberry Pi and a nice alpha adapter and get a decent antenna, and a battery. Throw it in your backpack. Run some software in order to just do some nefarious Wi-Fi stuff, right? And go for a walk. I mean, that was basically it. And so when I had, about 2 years ago, I had a kid, and, it really wasn't desirable to walk around town with a backpack and a kid and a stroller and all that. So I decided, being, the hacker dad I am, that I need to combine the two worlds. So I kind of made the war stroller. So after, I made the war stroller, I kind of started to kick around this idea of I need a more discrete method, right? I need smaller hardware to be able to achieve this task. And so I started poking around with some hardware stuff of, I don't really have to use a full-size Raspberry Pi. I can go with some of the zeros. So I grabbed a zero and made a custom cable and did some GPIO stuff to kind of control it a little bit. And I got it down into a decently condensed package there. And the main issue with this particular, Pis nowadays, they do have onboard Wi-Fi. However, monitor mode and doing things that are normally not supposed to do, it's not really supported officially, right? There's kind of ways you can get it to somewhat work, but not really fully, right?
And this was right about when I started getting to know Robert and see what he was doing. I'm like, that's cool. You're going for a walk with your kid and stealing your neighbor's handshakes. This is great. So I wanted to play too. So I got a Pi and I wrapped it up on this cable management thing, and I started taking the code that he wrote and build it out. And I went to a bar and I grabbed some handshakes at a bar, and then I went to a cigar shop, right, with Mark. That was you. I got yours, Mark. And that's a nice shop. You should all go there. And then I started traveling for work. So I took it to a couple of airports. I was in Milwaukee and Detroit, and I was in Kentucky and various places. Like, you get some pretty interesting stuff from those international flights. And then I went to DerbyCon, and I wore a hat with it, and I tweeted about shaking like 3,000 hands while I was over there, and that's what I was talking about. And got a ticket to go back again, so that was pretty awesome. And then Robert made it even smaller.
Yeah, so I found a kind of repository called Nexmon, which we'll get to in a second. But basically, Nexmon allowed you to modify the firmware on the onboard Wi-Fi in order for you to actually utilize the Wi-Fi chipset on the Raspberry Pi 3 and W0 to actually put it into monitor mode, so you can start doing fun things like hackers like to do. So of course I'm going, well, I'm already on this quest to find, the most compact hardware I can do, on the cheap without rolling my own solution and yada, yada, yada. So this is kind of what I've designed, right? Pretty small. This literally turns on, turns off. It self-powers battery, like it automatically just turn it on and it goes. You can slip it into any pocket. You can put it anywhere you really want, and it's quite effective.
Not there.
Yeah. I really enjoy the thought of, gluing an neodymium magnet onto it and going into a place and saying, stick it under a chair, and walk away, that kind of a thing. So this kind of attack vector is something that
it's
I don't know.
Not super expensive either.
No, it's not.
Because I decided I couldn't solder as well, so I just bought a couple adapters and I stuck one in here. So I've got a pickle nick that's got the same hardware in it, a little bit bigger battery, but I didn't put the some of the logic that he's got on there yet to auto shut down and stuff. So it's still kind of a little bit of a work in progress, but I thought this was really fun. So I thought I'll send this over to my mommy and have her put the zipper in for it. So because I don't know how to sew either. But if you want to make one, I got a parts list for you. So you can go to this tiny URL /pickleNick, and it's just an Amazon wish list that has all the pieces in it. It even has wire and stuff in there in case you're like me and actually didn't even have a soldering iron, which is the only thing missing from the list. So you can go to this tiny URL and pick it up. If you have a lot of the parts already, it'll hardly cost you $60 to put it together. If you already have a Pi, it might not even cost you $20. It's
cheap.
Pretty great.
Yeah, it's not an expensive thing to build, and it's an attack platform that is really, really cool in my eyes. So worth the money.
So with this hardware and walking around and going to other places, I wanted to kind of illustrate what we were able to get with it. So at my old job, I actually just test run it at my desk for about an hour, and I was collecting handshakes for my coworkers, and I got about 80 different handshakes, which yielded about 8 different SSIDs. So 8 different networks. I'm not exactly sure how many devices I was actually associating with, but within an hour, I got 8 unique ones.
Yeah, and just to be clear, as far as unique SSIDs, people can have the same SSID in multiple places. So a good example would be maybe you have a Netgear router at home, and most of those are named Netgear and then 2 numbers. Someone else, sitting next to you could have the exact same SSID. So
Wi-Fi.
We're literally looking at SSIDs based on the network name alone. We're not looking at MAC address information, etc.
So then when I was at the bar, I shook hands over 100 times and got 6 different SSIDs. I think it was the same guy in every network he was on. But then I took a drive from Wisconsin to Minnesota and back, and I just laid it on my dash, and I started collecting hashes on the highway. I got 388 different hashes, which gave me 73 unique networks, just by taking a drive I was going to do anyway. And then at DerbyCon, I spent over 3 days there with this thing on my head, got over 8,500 hashes and 548 different SSIDs. So that was a pretty good haul. But then I went to Cybersecurity Chicago, which is a conference down there, and I got over 14,600 handshakes and 433 SSIDs in 6 hours. So holy crap, that worked awesome.
And that's kind of a testament to HCX tools, and what Zerbera is kind of doing is that the performance of his tools is insane. This guy really puts a lot of work into it, and it's really, really fast. And half the time you don't even really know that it's even really happening because it's happening so fast. So
Yeah, I mean, it can be a little disruptive if you leave it on the aggressive mode where it actually de-auth users and like you're standing next to it, like your stuff stops working. That was kind of hard to do demos. But it actually can also be made to be very friendly, and it'll only do like probe requests instead of having to do de-authing and stuff too. So you can put it in a nice friendly mode, but still like the haul from that one day was incredible. Like if you travel on the subway or something in Chicago, like you're nice. So the software that we used, in addition to the hardware setup, I kind of want to walk through some of the software we did. So obviously it's running a version of Linux on the Pi. I used Raspbian because I'm a noob, and he used Arch Linux because he knows what he's doing. And like he was saying, for the Wi-Fi adapter on the Pi 0 and the Pi 3, by default you can't put it into monitor mode, but if you use this solution Nexmon, he did that. I didn't know.
Yeah, it's basically just a method to flash the firmware on the actual device itself and a set of drivers to actually put it into monitor mode. It's not the best solution out there. Like I would definitely not go with this as far as like I want this to be high performing. It's not the best solution. The adapter on there is not very good. The antenna is not very good. But if you want a super discreet, attack platform,
you don't want to walk around with a pickle in your pants.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and then the software that I was actually doing the work is from HCX Tools. So Zerba did that, and man, that guy, he's still working on it. It's actively being developed. If you have any feedback or interesting ideas,
he's really good about keeping stuff updated. The moment something comes out with cracking software that he could utilize, usually within a couple days to a week, he has that updated and ready to rock and roll. So huge props to him. I have much respect for the guy.
And then Hashcat, of course, is the software we're using to do the offline cracking. And then Hashtopolis, which was basically just doing the distribution of the hash cracking to do it faster. So all of these links here to get access to that. More about
so HCX Tools, doesn't just attack WPA2 pre-shared key. It attacks a lot of stuff. Chat, Net, NTLM, TACXX. It's kind of any authentication method that WPA kind of supports and wireless kind of supports. In some way, shape, or form, HCX Tools is attacking it. So basically, anything and everything that Hashcat and John the Ripper supports as far as wireless network authentication goes, HCX Tools kind of supports and is a really nice platform to grab that kind of stuff. Definitely 2.5 and 5 gigahertz compatible. GPIO support, so that way you can actually have, like a headless system. I use that, loosely, but, you have, power on, power off, and, like a status LED to make sure everything is still running fine. So, yeah. The big thing with the kind of push for this, at least I think, this is kind of my opinion. The big push for this like unauthenticated WPA attack was kind of spearheaded when Adam changed a little bit of stuff in Hashcat. He kind of revamped how Hashcat handles WPA authentication cracking. And during that time, when he was looking through it and kind of giving it a hard once over, he found a couple bugs that resulted in some uncrackable handshakes, but they were actually legitimate handshakes. So there were some issues with like cleaning of capture files and things that current solutions really didn't do so well. So he created CapX, and it's kind of a smarter way to handle WPA handshakes. And during this, he kind of was like, look, if we look at, the four-way handshake process, we don't really have to have all four parts. And that was a big thing in, the cracking community when everyone's talking about, WPA, the only way you're going to be able to crack it is if you have all four parts. Well, that's not necessarily true. We could do it with just a couple parts of it. That's really what we're what we're attacking, is that we don't need all four of it. Is it nice to have all four of it? Yeah. All four just basically means that it's a full capture. We know for sure that the password that was used was the password that is actually used on the network. It's a legitimate full capture. But we don't have to have it in order to crack the pre-shared key used for that network.
Yeah, and that thread on the Hashcat forum, if you look for message 6273, he actually describes how that works. You can actually get it with message 1 and 2 or 2 and 3, and 4 is like basically useless. So
yeah,
but he
4 is just everything's okay.
So we also pickled CypherCon yesterday, and you all played, so we appreciate that.
So we captured 2,310 handshakes total. That is not a unique, SSID list, but that's quite a few, at least in my eyes, as far as like our demographic here. We're all in a security kind of area, and hacker-ish-y kind of thing going on. So most people are pretty heightened, security-wise. So I'm pretty impressed with that number. I thought that we would, get much less than that. So. But hey, it goes to show that not everyone turns their Wi-Fi off at security conferences. So all in all, we got 140 unique SSIDs from yesterday, which is quite a few. I think that's decent, especially considering our demographic again. So,
do you want to know the next one?
Yeah. Do you really want to know the next one? Should we just stop now? So 45 of those networks we were able to crack in 15 hours. That's 32% of what we were able to grab. I think that's pretty damn impressive, especially considering the implementations that we could do with that. So, let's say, for example, now we know the pre-shared key. I mean, if we were nefarious individuals, we could definitely set up an access point with the same pre-shared key, and your device would happily connect to it, and we could be man in the middle.
Then we can do karma.
Yeah.
New karma.
Yeah. So that's an interesting attack vector, especially considering that we don't have to be near the access point. We don't have to be near your business. We don't have to be near your home. We just have to be near a device that has connected to your home at some point in time. And
just to put a finer point on it, someone will understand this. I don't know who half eats a cheeseburger, but that's
yeah.
Weird.
If you 12 of them, if you can't, 12 half-eaten cheeseburgers, man, that's you
only
got a
one
problem, buddy.
Person's going to get that joke. But
if you know what we're talking about, come find me because I want to share a couple words with you.
So I would be remiss as a blue teamer type guy if I didn't say something about how to do some remediation. And one of the things that you could do is stop using Wi-Fi, but who's going to do that, right? That's like, no. The other thing you can do is stop using pre-shared keys. Now at home, that's not a really good option either, but at businesses, there are options.
Most
you can
definitely
do things like cert-based Wi-Fi, which move away from this, and now you need the certs to do it. You can also start moving to WPA3, which I don't believe this will work on, but it's only recently been ratified, and it's not even in the mainstream yet. So good luck with that. It's going to take some time.
Prove me wrong, but I think it's going to be a good decade before WPA3 is really a thing that we see constantly.
Your cell phones don't do WPA3.
Yeah,
so.
There's not very many devices that are even really considering it yet. So
the other thing you could do, I don't know if this really counts as remediation, but you can do monitoring. So I don't know if you've ever met Leonard, but he's actually a founder of Greylog. He also wrote Enzyme, which is awesome. It also runs on Pies, and it basically just collects all of the management frames in wireless networking so it can see what's happening. If I send out a probe request and you actually respond, but that SSID wasn't beaconing before, it'll tell you that. So it actually does a really good job of doing wireless intrusion detection.
Yeah, just kind of keeping an eye on things, making sure everything's, just intrusion detection, making sure that things are connecting to what they should be and not weird things, and just kind of that stuff. So WTF.horse, definitely check it out. It's awesome. I've ran it for a while.
So for remediation at home, since we're not really going to be moving away from WPA2 anytime with the pre-shared keys, you really could just use a long password. Just because I can capture your hash doesn't mean I can crack it. So if you get a really long password, I am now in that realm of years of waiting to unwind your password.
Yeah, and I really do mean long, like really long.
Yeah. And you can go up to 63 characters with WPA2.
Yeah, so utilize that. And I know a lot of you are probably like, no, oh my God, like why would I ever want to type that,
so
right?
Long ass password that I can't remember or say. How do you do that? Well, we've got options. You don't have to type your pre-shared key. If you've seen, what'd you say, QIFI.org, they have this really great QR code generator that you can just type in the SSID and the passphrase. It does it all in JavaScript, so it doesn't submit it to his website.
There's an offline version as well. So
yep, and he's got the code in GitHub if you want to build your own. But you can create this QR code, and then this picture in the corner here is actually me putting a piece of paper inside the cabinets of my kitchen. So if a guest were to come over and they want to get on the Wi-Fi, they could just point the camera at it and your phone will actually say, oh, you want to join a Wi-Fi network? So it actually is really nice. Plus, if you have like an Android, you can do NFCs to share codes back and forth. And iOS will actually let you share with each other if you're in proximity of each other. So if you're sitting next to a friend of yours that's at your house and they connect to your Wi-Fi, if you're close enough physically to the phone, it'll say, hey, George is trying to connect to your Wi-Fi. Do you want to give him the pre-shared key? You say yes, and it'll do it. So you can give passwords without typing them. And it can be these 63-character random craziness.
So remediation at work, this is where stuff gets kind of important. We have, you really shouldn't be using WPA2 personal. Normally that's like pre-shared key. You could do the same thing as what you're doing at home if you have your intermediary network where it's kind of like, I have secure stuff, an intermediary one, and a guest. But you really should be using a public key infrastructure, certificates. That is definitely key. And certificates is really the only way that you can actually mitigate this attack effectively. Otherwise, everything else kind of has some flaws that you can exploit. Yeah. So.
And then I like to throw out the idea of having at least 3 different kinds of networks at your work. Like if you have a guest network with no authentication, it should be a pretty restricted network that just gets internet basically. And you can filter it and rate limit it or whatever you want, but maybe put a captive portal or whatever on it. But that should have access to basically nothing. Then maybe you'll have a devices network, which could be for your employee devices and other things like a Chromecast or Apple TV or whatever if you want to actually do some media sharing, so you allow peer-to-peer. But the only way to get on it is with this crazy QR code, right? And then you'd have your CorpNet network that preferably would be something like WPA2 Enterprise that uses cert-based Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and on top of this, you can use this as kind of like a management thing as well. Is that way, you have some sort of management individual saying, yes, this device is allowed onto the network itself by using like a QR system where most people are not going to be typing a ridiculously long password and that kind of a thing. So.
And that brings us to the end. A little bit of summary. Remember, your passwords, they get cracked because we guess passwords and run them through the algorithm. We don't capture the hash and rewind it. We actually have to guess them a whole bunch of times. So the worse password you create, the harder it is to be cracked. You can generate passwords. There's a whole bunch of examples on the internet. WPA2 personal is only secured by the password you give it, because if you use a crap password, you can crack it real fast. Rainbow tables are lousy, so instead just use plain text password wordless, and CHASM to actually refactor those. If you want to build a pickle, you can go ahead and go to tinyurl.com/picklenick.
Send me pictures on Twitter.
Yeah, let's show us your pickles.
Yeah. Well, okay now.
Context, okay. And then the tools to get it is from Zerba and the HCX tools. So we have about 3 minutes to our time. If anybody's got any
questions. You want to recap questions? Anyone have some questions?
Recap questions? Yeah.
You, man. Yeah.
The 45 networks that you hacked since yesterday.
Correct.
What was your rig?
We used the rig itself. Well, okay. So the question was basically, what do we use to crack the 45 unique SSIDs from yesterday? We have about 15 GPUs running the Hashtopolis distribution platform thing, whatever you want to call it. So that's kind of like what we're using. The stats from before are pretty close to what we were running. So, other questions?
Yeah. Cryptocurrency with those GPUs.
Yeah, can you mine cryptocurrency? Yeah. Sure, but it's not as fun.
Yeah, I mean, cryptocurrency, it's basically, is the fan spinning? Yeah, okay. Right?
Well, there's a history there, but meet us out there. But
yeah.
So you got 32% in 15 hours.
Correct.
You got a week or so? I mean...
it depends. Kind of depends on what exactly is used for the pre-shared key. I would suspect that, in a week or so, 50% is not unreasonable. We could probably, if I'm being optimistic, I might be able to hit 65%, but that's all just guessing. You don't know until you actually try. And so, that's kind of where I'm at with that.
We still got about 2 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
What's your cracking methodology on those 43%?
So basic stuff, man. It's nothing really too complex. And that's kind of, I should have highlighted that a little bit better. He asked kind of what was the methodology we used in order to crack those 45 networks. And we're not talking about complex stuff. We're literally just straight dictionary tags. Rocky was the most effective. Come on now. So we did run the found list from hashes.org as well, and just a couple basic brute forces as well. So nothing seriously complex, no CHASM, no nothing like that. So other questions?
What was your favorite password that you cracked?
Oh, definitely. I shouldn't say that.
You can modify it a little bit so it's not the actual one.
Yeah, I guess I could modify it some. I don't know. Does a bear shit in the woods is pretty great.
Don't hack me, bro, was kind of
Yeah,
funny.
that's a good. So yeah, I mean, people never cease to amaze me. We'll put it that way. Other questions?
All right, if you do have any other questions, we're going to be here for a while. We're going to do the closing ceremonies coming up next. So thank you very much. I hope this was good for you.
Yeah, come say hello.